Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Oklahoma City Economic Development Trust. This is the meeting of Tuesday, May 11th. The first item on our agenda is to approve the minutes of the April 13th meeting. The minutes have been distributed to you previously. Are there corrections or additions to the minutes?
I'd move approval.
Second. All those? No. Please cast your votes. And you need to take Ward off there. The bond thing.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
There
we go.
Okay. Now let's see if it works. Ah, yes. Now it actually reflects. Right. Okay. Okay. Well, hey, I'm just thinking of my retirement fund, that's all. The second item on our agenda, or the next item, I should say, is to ratify some claims that have been paid in the last month. Are there any questions or comments on the claims? With the one exception, they're all TIF money, and that exception is a contribution from the general fund to pay for the economic development services. Any questions on the payments that have been made? The chair would entertain a motion to ratify.
So moved.
Second. Cast your votes. And it carries. Thank you. Okay, the next item, item 4, we have several items under item 4, items for individual consideration. The first is concurrence with the Oklahoma City Water Utilities Trust on a project that is associated with PAYCOM. Kathy, do you have any comments that you'd like to make on that project?
The one thing I wanted to point out is that in the future, the trust will probably see quite a few concurrence items where we're concurring with another trust or with the city to carry out certain projects. And this is the water and sewer improvements that we agreed to help fund for PAYCOM. And a portion of the money does come from the general obligation limited tax bonds, the Economic Development Incentive Fund for PAYCOM. And then the rest of the funding is from the Water Utilities Trust. So again, you're going to see quite a few of these in the future. I just wanted to make sure that you understood that this is going to be kind of a routine kind of agenda item for the trust.
This is a project that, in addition to benefiting PAYCOM, is in a rapidly developing area of Oklahoma City, so it will have a significant benefit to for future development in that particular part of the town. So it's got a lot of good aspects to it. So, the chair will entertain a motion to concur with the Oklahoma City Water Utilities Trust on this project.
So moved.
Second. Please cast your votes. And we concur. Thank you very much. Item 4B, ratify and approve addenda numbers 1, 2, and 3 for project MP0412A, the Myriad Botanical Gardens demolition package. Kathy, any particular comments on this one?
These were some addenda to the plans and specifications that were issued prior to the bids being received for the demolition project in the Myriad Gardens that is underway right now. And this is funded through TIF 8, and I think you guys probably, it's not just the demolition, but it is the earthwork for the gardens, the finished earthwork that that needs to be done before we can begin replanting and the landscape construction.
One of the paragraphs in here dealt with the was originally planned for TIF 8, but now some of the money is going to be GO bond money. And Kathy, would you care to elucidate on why that change has been made?
Right, and actually, I think it's one of the next items, maybe it is this one, assigns the project from TIF 8 funding to the general obligation bonds. One of our goals with the downtown streetscapes and the Myriad Gardens project is to spend, these are our regular general obligation bond funds. These are not economic development funds. These were bonds that were issued for the Myriad Gardens to make improvements, and we want to spend those first before we begin to spend the TIF 8 money, because we are borrowing that from Devon. These bond funds had already been issued, so we need to get them spent as quickly as possible.
Are there any questions? Yeah, Larry.
And Kathy, those general obligation bonds were specified when the voters voted that money go for this?
Yes, yes. There's about $13 million or so issued for the Myriad Gardens specifically, some of it for the reglazing of the Crystal Bridge and some of it for exterior garden improvements.
Any questions or comments? Chair would entertain a motion to ratify and approve addenda 1, 2, and 3.
So moved.
Okay. Please cast your votes. And the item carries. Thank you very much. Item 4C, a joint resolution between Oklahoma City Economic Development Trust and the City of Oklahoma City for the project we just discussed above. And this project is that further delineates the change in funding and the city becoming the contractor in this one.
Right. Yeah. This item assigns the contract from the Economic Development Trust to the City of Oklahoma City so that we can use those general obligation bond funds, which are issued by the city.
Okay, so we won't see any more disbursements related to this project on our list of ratified claims.
We may.
Okay.
It depends on, I don't know, not on this project, not on the demolition, but on the Myriad Gardens
Right.
as a whole,
Yeah,
yes, there will be TIF 8
But since we
funds.
transferred to the GO bond funds, it takes it out of our
Right,
purview.
yes.
So, okay. Are there any other questions or comments? Chair would entertain a motion to approve the resolution.
Second.
Please cast your votes. And the motion is carried. Thank you very much. Item 4D is to ratify and approve addendas 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and rejecting bids for project PC 0379A. That has to do with our 180 streetscape plan. Comments from the staff on this particular project?
On this project, we received bids on April 27th, and the bids came in higher than anticipated, and we believed that that was because of a very aggressive construction schedule. Since the bids were received, we've had some discussions and re-look at the project, and we believe that we can accommodate a less aggressive construction schedule and rebid this project in the spring of 2011. So we're asking to reject the bids and delay this project until spring in hopes that we can get more favorable pricing.
Any questions?
Does it affect the overall schedule to
No.
defer this to later? Okay.
Those aggressive schedules that may have caused us to have to reject the bids, were there penalties associated with that drove that particular aspect of it?
Yes.
Okay, so that the contractors were probably insuring themselves against that. So, are there any questions or comments? I move we ratify and approve addendums 1, 2, 3, and 4 on this particular project.
Second.
Thank you very much. Please cast your votes. Item carries. Item 4E is final plans and specifications for project MP0412B, the Myriad Botanical Gardens renovation site improvements. Comments from the staff?
This project are the plans and specifications for the landscape improvements at the Myriad Gardens. As the memo mentions, it will use both TIF 8 and GO bond, infrastructure bonds for the project. The estimated construction cost is $23.6 million.
So this is the big project for the Myriad Gardens.
Yes, there is one more set of plans and specifications that are still under development that are for the architectural elements in the gardens, which will be the restaurant, the cafe, the addition to the Crystal Bridge for a new south entry, and I'm probably forgetting something, but those pieces are in another package that's yet to come.
Kathy, if you remember, could you refresh my memory on the total cost of our Myriad Gardens project?
I believe it's $36 million.
And it'll be a combination of TIF and GO money and so forth. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Chair, entertain a motion to approve this particular item. Okay. We have a motion made and seconded. Please cast your votes. And the motion carries. Thank you very much. Item F is the Oklahoma City Economic Development Foundation quarterly report. And who's going to do that?
I get to do that
Mike
today.
Hogan.
Michael Hogan with the
Mike, thank
Greater
you.
Oklahoma City Chamber. Good afternoon. Good to see you all again. A couple of marketing materials that we put together first. We, a couple of times a year, put together a tabloid. It's one of the mechanisms we use through direct mail to keep in contact with site consultants and corporate decision makers. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it from there, but the cover article on this one's the Devon Tower. If you'd like, we can get you copies so you can review. But it's one of the pieces we use to try to keep top of mind with decision makers and the site consultants so they're aware of what's happening. It gives us something to sort of hang them with periodically as opposed to just contact them. We've updated some of our materials for sustainability, wind and solar power, which we do on a periodic basis. Try to hit some of the higher points. Robin gave me some issues to cover, make sure we touch base on them. We're seeing an uptick in prospect inquiries, which is a good thing. An even better thing is we've also seen an uptick in community visits by prospect companies. And if we get community visits, we have a much higher likelihood of actually successfully landing the project. If companies, we don't get them to that stage, usually we fall off the list. But if we can get them here, we have a much easier time to convince them that this is a viable market to participate. And usually we change their initial perceptions of what Oklahoma City is all about and the opportunities we have here. Of the 54 locates we've had so far, 8 of those have been new to market, which is a little lower percentage than we normally see and is an effect of the economic tough times we went through the last 18 months. We expect as the economy picks up, that's likely to shift a little higher, and we're starting to see some indications that we might in fact see a higher level of new to market prospects. Pickup companies are getting to the point where they're now engaging consultants more, so we're seeing more RFPs and site location inquiries. The bio show was just in Chicago. We took about 70 representatives of the community, primarily local companies, but a number of institutions and other people as well. We're working with Battelle to update the bio strategy that was done about 5 years ago, and right now Robin's meeting with the steering committee of that group. That study is expected to be done and published this summer, and so we'll bring information back to you probably the next quarterly report on where that sits. That's all funded with Forward 3 funds. City doesn't, there's no city funds in that one, but we want to make you aware of it because it's a piece that impacts our work and impacts the city. We're also going to host the 2010 National SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research Grant, conference here in November, the 8th and 10th. That'll bring a number of federal agencies that fund innovation and research locally that we'll be able to introduce to the area, plus it gives us an opportunity to get local companies connected with those funding sources. So hopefully we can get some product on the ground and some funding. Tinker continues to add new jobs on a sort of rolling, ongoing basis. So we'll have periodic updates of they added 100 here or 200 there. They get more missions assigned here, and we're seeing an uptick in the vendors and suppliers, the Pratt & Whitney's, Lockheed's. Those are asking questions. None of them have, as of yet, moved into the new TAC facility, but there's lots of interest. We're also hosting the Oklahoma Aerospace Summit here in June, first week. There'll be a number of high-level military officials, as well as some of the representatives of the corporate vendors and suppliers. That'll give us an opportunity to meet with them directly, as well as provide them tours of town and some introductions to the opportunities here. So we always try to take advantage of that. We expect that there'll be about 500 people here for that conference, mostly from in-state, but also a number of the vendors and suppliers and aerospace companies from around the country that do work with Tinker, as well as do work in Tulsa with the civilian aviation community. We'll be hosting the International Economic Development Council How to Build It conference, which is about public-private partnerships, community development issues. That'll be here June 6th through 8th. And that'll give us some exposure to national developers, architecture firms, those kind of things. So again, it'll provide us an opportunity to showcase the city to people that otherwise might not be here.
Mike, what was that conference again?
It's IEDC, the International Economic Development, and it's the How You Build It conference. In the recent past, we've commissioned through a private consultant a consumer profile study that on the retail side describes what the consumer market looks like here. That information we used, primarily Allison, to market the opportunities we have here. Partly as a result of that, the recent Whole Foods announcement that you've seen in the paper, actually the official press release is going to come out tomorrow. The Chamber had some involvement in that in terms of helping them assess some of their alternative sites that they looked at. So that's been in play for a little bit, and we're glad that sort of we managed to convince them to go forward, although I think one of our private sector companies played a major role in the middle part of the city. Energy company does a lot of natural gas work. So far, we're on budget for the rest of the fiscal year. We believe we'll hit all of our goals or exceed them, other than for the number of jobs created. And that's, again, a carryover of the economic times. We'll probably hit about 50 or 60% of what our annual jobs goal are. But everything else looks like we're well above in terms of the number of locates, the amount of revenues, investments, those kind of things. Any questions? I didn't want to go through sort of the report detail by detail, but if there are issues.
Yeah, the announcement this past week of the call center at the Xerox plant, is that one of the ones that's listed on?
It's not. We were generally aware of it, but they pretty much kept both us and the state at arm's length.
Okay. Now, you've got 12 projects on here. Just as a guess, what percentage of those will actually close?
Generally, if we get about 10% of the total sort of leads we have at any point in the year, that's about average. So if we're dealing with generally between 70 and 100 companies, we'll get between 7 and 10 locates out of those. It'll vary depending on the kind of industry and where we are sort of on the competitive range with our neighboring states and otherwise around the country. So sometimes we'll see a major uptick in the number of locates we get. In other cases, we won't get the 10% because of the nature of the companies that are looking around. And we found in a number of cases that the consultant community sometimes uses us to leverage incentives from neighboring states, particularly our neighbor to the south. And so we'll have somebody that the project may be a firm that's described as a complete relocation. They're going to pick up lock, stock, and barrel and move out of San Antonio or Houston or New Orleans or Nashville, which in most cases seldom happens. And so we usually look at those as a slim chance that we'll win those, but we compete with them as if they're real. But we suspect in a number of cases that they're merely leveraging Oklahoma's incentives to get more out of the home state which they reside in, because it's usually easier to stay where you are and expand than to shut operations and locate someplace else.
Mike, you mentioned that last year's job numbers didn't hit target. How do we rate on kind of the 5-year plan from Florida Oklahoma City 3? Or
I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but I think we've been ahead of plan up until late 08.
I was just thinking, while you provide the annual report, it might be good to give a 3-year horizon, because then we can kind of level out what the volatility we naturally have with the ups and downs of the economy. Thanks.
That's a good point, David. This format is one that the Economic Development Committee has used for some time, and I would encourage all of you, if you've got suggestions for additional information you'd like to see, or information here that you think is not necessary, please let us know so we can modify the report to meet our needs.
Mike, why are we a comparative state or city, so to speak, because of our competitiveness with others, or?
There's a number of states that have fairly significant incentive programs. The state's QJP, Quality Jobs Program, that's basically a payroll rebate. There's been a number of states that have echoed or copied that. But it's a statutory incentive, and so it's relatively easy for someone to say, if we do X, what do we qualify for? Where in many states their incentives are purely discretionary. And so if you're in a state where there's that discretionary incentive and you want to get a benchmark of what could we get if we move somewhere else, it's relatively easy for companies to say, okay, we're now in Nashville, St. Louis, wherever. If we moved 300 jobs to your state and they paid X and we made X in capital investment, all of those here are statutory programs that if you do X, you get Y. So it's easy for the state to basically provide an analysis that says that. And so they can go back to their home state and say, match or remove. We expect in most cases companies are actually doing a legitimate site search, but there's probably a small percentage of companies that that's an easy way to basically hold your community hostage.
Mike, thank you very much for your report.
Thank you.
Another report now. This is the rest of the story. Roy, is that what we call it?
One way of putting it. Mr. Chairman, trustees, thank you for the time to share a few things with you. There's several things, and y'all have already started kind of talking on the fringe of some of the things that I want to cover, so maybe I'll give you some insight into some of the questions that you might still have. In a very condensed period of time, I want to cover about three things. One, sort of overview our role at the Chamber in sort of the big picture of total community development and economic development, to share some insight on the competitive environment that does exist. Mike's already talked a little bit about it, and those things that we as a community, you as an entity, can do to enhance those odds and to raise that 1 out of 10 success rate. And then specifically outline some thoughts to you about what the trust potential roles could be and how our roles relative to your roles could potentially leverage each other and make us more successful as what we do. I'm going to go through this very quickly. It's only, I think, 11 slides, but don't hesitate to stop me or to ask questions as I'm doing it and as I'm going through it. You saw the cover page. Let me put all this up there right quick. When you think about the large context of why do we do what we do, it's in this context. It's in the context of total community development, meaning we all want to better our community and create a community in which we can live, work, play, our kids can, our grandkids can, and that has a quality of opportunity in it for all of the above. But the first question that you have to ask yourself is, well, how do you do that? How do you build a quality community? Well, this is how you build a quality community. You look at what the components are of what total community development is all about. And it's comprised of those 4 components that are up there: the social environment, political environment, physical environment, economic environment. I won't go into detail all of those, but let me just on a high level tell you what each one of those are. The social environment. That's a component that is very critical to the success of any community. That means you have to have a social infrastructure that functions, whether it is nonprofit organizations, whether it's religious organizations. You have to have entities like United Ways, YMCAs, PTAs, churches, et cetera, who are support groups who provide very needed services and support to various people throughout the community. So those elements that comprise the social element are critical to a quality community. Likewise, the political environment is too. That means that you have to have functioning and effective political entities. You have to have local government, school districts, city council, county commissioners who do good jobs in providing quality, cost-effective services, whether it's water, sewer, trash pickup, police, fire, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So quality communities have functional political jurisdictions that do that for the taxes we pay them, they provide quality services. The physical environment's third component. That means that there are a lot of physical resources that exist in communities, whether it's water, whether it's clean air, whether it's natural elements that occur. Those are all key components to developing such that they contribute to the quality of life, that you keep your air clean, that you take care of your water and your resources like that, that you wisely use the natural resources that you have. And finally, there's the economic environment. And that's the environment that is also critical to having a well-rounded, total quality community. The economic component has to be strong. Now, what is interesting is that these 4 environments all have a relationship. And that relationship is on the next slide. And that is that economic environment, that fourth one, is the one of the four environments that provides the resources that allow the other three components to get developed. What I want to make sure, though, you understand is it doesn't guarantee it. It just allows it. You can have a strong economic environment, but that doesn't mean those other three environments are functioning and that they're doing well and that they're contributing to the quality of your community. But without the strong economic environment, you don't have the resources to do the other three. If people don't have jobs, if people aren't paying taxes, then the political entities can't deliver. Social organizations don't get contributions if people don't have jobs. So it doesn't assure that the other three components will be developed, but it does provide the resources. So it's the economic environment then that we tend to focus on. And when you look at the economic environment and you say, well, how do you develop it as you start to drill down, it's relatively simple. It is the creation of jobs. But what you need to know and what that information shows you on that slide is that there are two different kinds of jobs. There are what we refer to as primary jobs and there are secondary jobs. The primary jobs are jobs in which goods or services are produced and they are exported outside of your defined geography. Whether it's a city, whether it's a county, whether it's a state, depending on who you are and what you represent, determines where outside is and where you export to. They serve external markets. They import wealth, export those goods and services. And then there's also a component of primary jobs that are import substitutes, meaning in a lot of communities, you cannot produce 100% of the demand that your citizens have. So they have to go out of your community to get those services. So the more that you can stop the exportation of your wealth and continue to import wealth, then you are substituting that import. And so those also are primary jobs. On the flip side of the corner, secondary jobs. Now, they tend to be retail. They tend to be service. They do serve strictly internal markets, and they live off of the wealth that already exists in the community. They do not create wealth. Now, there are several areas I could tell you where there's some exceptions to this rule, but you'll get that as I move on. The other thing is there's a correlation between primary and secondary jobs. That correlation is if you create primary jobs, you create a demand and a market for secondary jobs, and they automatically come. You do not have to recruit them. On the other hand, if you solely try to create secondary jobs, you will never create a primary job. They do not follow. There is no cause and effect between that. But where there is a market, secondary jobs will come in and fill it. Now, it may not always be the ones you want, but they'll come. And sometimes they will compete with each other and many will fail. But that's the way the market works. So our focus, obviously, then, to create wealth, to create economic development, is to focus on the primary jobs. When you then talk further about primary jobs, there's a myth that, well, what you're talking about is manufacturing. It's not. Primary jobs are not defined by what product you make. If you look up there, you'll see that there are primary jobs in manufacturing, in distribution, in customer service, in higher education, in tourism, in government, et cetera. The best way to think about this is not the product or the service itself, what is made, but who buys it. Where is it sold? Because if it's sold out of your market, it's a primary job. If it's sold in your market, it's a secondary job. So companies who are essentially in the exact same business, one can be primary, one can be secondary. An example is printing. If you are a local printer or if you're a local newspaper and your market is the local market, you are a secondary job provider. But if you're a newspaper that prints the Wall Street Journal or USA Today, your market is external, and you're a primary job provider. So you can't just blatantly say, well, if you make this product, you're primary, you make this product, you're secondary. It depends where the market is. So that's how you have to think about primary versus secondary, is who is buying the product or service. That determines whether it's a wealth builder or if it lives off and circulates the existing wealth. The The next sequence in all this, and this gets kind of into what Mike was starting to talk about, are site location decision factors, and we break them up into two different components. One is what we refer to as tangible factors, or those factors that are totally uncontrollable, out of our hands. We can't change them. We either got them or we don't. And then on the other hand are the intangible factors, those that we can control, things that we can do, things that we can change overnight and change our competitive situation. So I want to talk a little bit about each one, because these are the critical components that determine really where you are in terms of success. If you look at the tangible factors, I already said this, fundamentally you have these factors or you don't. While you can change them, it will take you decades. It's not something you can do at a bargaining table and just say, we know that's a problem, we'll write you a bigger check. It doesn't work. So if you look at these, and the way this information has been developed, this is through surveys of site location or corporate real estate executives, and you ask them, when you decided to put your facility, whatever it is, that created primary jobs in the U.S., what was that one factor that rose to the top that drove where you were going to even consider putting that facility? Well, if I'd have been standing in front of you 10 years ago, I would have shown you exactly this thing, but there's been some changes in it, because about 10 years ago, about a third of those CEOs or CFOs or corporate real estate executives would have said, about a third of them would have said we're market-driven. And we build and put our facilities and hire employees to access our markets. Meaning, if you're serving the Pacific Northwest, you're not going to locate in Florida. You're going to locate somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, because that's where the market is. So about a third of locations were always driven by where their market was. A third was also driven by workforce. There's a number of companies out there that have very unique workforces, or not companies, but industries that have very unique workforces. And that workforce is only in a given place. And so wherever that is where they go. A perfect example of that is if you'll look at the semiconductor industry, the Intels, the Motorola's. They tend to always locate their facilities in cities that have universities that produce engineers, because they have a huge workforce demand of engineers. So they don't go locate somewhere where they don't have that workforce. And roughly a third would have told you a decade ago, that drives us. That's how we decide. The final third would say, market access not too critical, workforce not too critical, resources are. Meaning that they had something in what they did that they had to have immediate access to. If you make glass, you need silica or sand. You can't afford to transport it, so glass manufacturing facilities are wherever there's sand. Pulpwood, paperwood, plywood is all in forests, not in Arizona. And on and on and on. A lot of companies, that's what drives them, where the raw material that goes into their finished product is very critical. Or there's some other resource, someone adds value to what they're doing and complements it, and they have to be proximate to that. Now, I said all this 10 years ago. Flash forward to today, and if you look at that one-third, 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 it's now about one-sixth, two-thirds, one-sixth, meaning workforce is about 2 out of 3 locations are now driven by workforce. Market access, because of technology, resource, et cetera, same thing, has diminished, and the workforce has risen to the top.
Right. If you can catch your breath for a sec, I was going to just amplify on that for a little bit. As I was looking over our current contract and thinking about the cycle for next go-around and thinking about what you've told us, and I think we're seeing more and more about the emphasis on workforce, whether there should be a component of what the trust contracts with the chamber to do that really is specific to workforce. And I'm thinking not just higher ed, but pre-K through 20, since that continuum is so critical. So anyway, I just want to toss that out, because given the increase in importance of workforce, right, that to have that defined and to have you all suggest some metrics that we can then assess annually, I think would be really useful. So that way we have that addressed more specifically than we may have had in the past. So.
Has that workforce been a problem here? The quality of the workforce, size of the workforce?
It always is, yes. I mean, when you talk to our companies in this marketplace, they will tell you, depending on what they're looking for. A number of them continue to have difficulty recruiting certain skills, i.e. nursing, welding, some of those that are not necessarily advanced degrees, but they're higher than high school degrees. They need some skill set training. There's some shortages in there. Historically, companies have had a real difficult time recruiting from outside of this market into this marketplace the kind of professional that they needed. That's changed because the cities has changed. It's now a destination where before it wasn't. So now our employers are not seeing that as a problem. But it always costs more to recruit someone in from out of town than it does to recruit someone locally. So I would say our workforce has improved relative to our competition. It may, though, not have improved that significantly to existing employers. You know, we continue to struggle with education levels, achievement levels, the ability of kids coming out of school to be able to go straight into the workforce without additional training, without additional tutoring, et cetera. So we have to constantly look at that. We have to constantly continue, as David mentioned, continually look at our educational system and make sure it's producing not only students who are ready to go on to higher education, but students who are ready to enter the workforce and have those skill sets.
Is there a clear line of communication between your efforts as you identify workforce deficiencies to communicate that deficiency to the people who might be responsible or might be helpful?
We have those dialogues on an ongoing basis, you know, and through many different channels. I mean, directly with the community colleges, with career tech, with higher education, through the Workforce Investment Board. I mean, there's just many, many channels out there of different, even private entities, schools like the University of Phoenix and other providers like that. Yes. But it's never enough. and you can't ever say we've arrived and we can quit. It's something you always have to continue working on.
Well, if you see a role that this trust might play in that, let us know.
Absolutely. We'll bring that back to you.
It's something I think a lot of the members of the City Council are aware of, that we have some deficiencies in that area, and we're sort of looking for avenues where we might work on that. And so if you see it, places we can
Well, and one thing you are doing for workforce is you're building a better community, because that determines your ability to recruit workers and to retain workers. So indirectly, you're making a huge step forward in this. We've got to continue to build a quality community that a workforce wants to live in. Otherwise, they'll go somewhere else where they want to live.
Vonda?
Roy, how are we tracking on brain drain? Are we showing some improvements, especially in Oklahoma City?
Yes, we are. And we really measure it through our internship program. The summer internship program we do, we survey the kids, they're college graduates, they're not kids, because some of them are in their 30s. But we survey them prior to the program, and we survey them after the program. And we see significant changes in attitude as they become immersed in the community, understand job opportunities, understand social networking, et cetera. So I think we're making some really good strides. The problem is we'll never capture all the grads because we don't have enough jobs. You know, our higher education institutions, which I think there's 17 or 18 of them in the metro area, have about 120,000 students, and they give about 25,000 degrees every year. We don't create a net 20 to 25,000 college-level job openings. So we're going to lose them. They're going to go somewhere. And, of course, a lot of them are not from Oklahoma. They come here, they get their education, they go home. So it's not as though we have lost them. They never intended on staying here in the first place. And that's not unusual, but we still do capture a lot of those. And I think we tend to capture the best ones because they're in the internship program, and those tend to be really great students who are in the program. Keep moving if you want me to. Okay, the next slide is a little bit about competition, because the slide after this I'm going to tell you the good news. I kind of just told you the bad news, that we're kind of stuck with what we got. We have to slowly change those uncontrollable factors. We can't change them overnight. I'm going to talk about the ones we can change, but I want to give you a glimpse into competition, and I know you have this in front of you. I'll put it all up there, but I show you this because this is a mathematical computation. And in fact, a lot of communities across the United States approach economic development and job creation as we're such a great place, we don't have to do anything, things will automatically happen that are good. And these are the pure numbers and the statistical calculations of that happening. If a community chooses to put all their eggs in the basket of building the political environment or the social environment or the natural environment, and they don't focus on the economic environment, and they don't go out there and try to play heads up with the competition, and they just say, let's wait for a company to come to us because we're such a good place. We have a park, and we have a school, and we have a church, and we have a pond. We're a great place. There's got to be people just waiting to get to our city. Here's how long you'll wait. And you can look at those numbers, but roughly on average over the last 30, 40 years, there's about 2,500 primary job announcements that get made of significance, and there's always about 25,000 economic development organizations hoping to get those, so the pure odds on any one chance of getting one of these locations are 1 in 10, or if you look at that differently, it's every 10 years. You should get lucky if you just play the Las Vegas odds. Drilling down, though, of those 2,500, 75% of those 2,500 go to urban areas, 25% to rural areas. So now your ratios change depending on if you're urban or rural. And essentially in an urban area, every 13 years you should get lucky, and in a rural area, every 40 years. And then finally, if you're hoping you're going to get a company that's going to employ at least 100 people, well, only 1 in 10 of those do that. So now rural communities will have to wait 400 years for that one to fall off the turnip truck and hit their town, while urban areas every 133 years. That's how competitive it is out there. There's no long line of companies waiting to go into communities out there. There is a huge amount of effort and resources put in by other communities and other economic development organizations to capture these precious primary jobs that are out there. So now the good news. And these are what we refer to as the intangible factors or the controllable factors. I'll tell you that there's a whole lot more than this. But these are the simplest ones, and these are the ones that really are kind of ratchet their way up to the top of the list as to what drives corporate decision making. Those are not in numerical order, but I tell everyone, if you can't take care of number 1, don't worry about 2 through 5. They won't happen. And I also get asked frequently, how do you define community attitude? And I say, I don't know how you define it, but I know it when I see it. And so do you. You know communities that have a good attitude toward economic development because of an experience you had, or you saw something, or something happened. Likewise, you know communities that have a bad attitude toward economic development. Well, people who are trying to do economic development obviously want the good attitude. And how you do that and what you can do is multifaceted. And fortunately in our city, our attitude is very different than it was 20 years ago. And people feel that, they sense that, they experience that. So we're at the top of the list in terms of community attitude. But of course it doesn't assure you anything, but it positions you and it keeps you in the running. I'm not going to go through all of these in depth, but kind of following this, research and planning, that simply means that if you're going to be successful in beating the competition, you have to know who you are. And you have to understand how that relates to your competition, and you need to have a plan and a strategy to either fix those liabilities or to leverage those liabilities. Sites and buildings, this is such a simple thing, it's often overlooked. We tend to think as long as you have land, you have sites and buildings. You don't. Land is not a site. A site has to have infrastructure. So just because there is plenty of land in Oklahoma City doesn't mean we have sites for primary job providers. It just means we have land. Now, the problem with that, and same as with buildings, is what you have to be very careful of is there's a big spectrum of demand out there. It's much like each of you deciding where you're going to live. Some of you probably want to live in the country, in the middle of 100 acres where you can't see your neighbors. Others might want to live in downtown in a high-rise. There's a whole spectrum in between there, and when you put all your eggs into one of those baskets, you eliminate all the other opportunities that are out there. So the diversity of sites, size, cost, location, infrastructure around it is important. The diversity of buildings, 10,000 square foot, 50, 100, 500,000 square feet. I mean, unfortunately, we do not have a national development presence in our community of large national developers. Most of our developers are local, and they take care of local business. But by not having national development presence here, we don't have the national developers who have clients all over the world who build these parks, business, office, industrial parks, and bring those clients in. That is a weakness in our area. We have a lack of sites and buildings in this community. We run into it all the time, and it's not unusual at all for a client to come knocking on the door and say, if you don't have a 150,000 square foot building, you're off the list. Period. Doesn't matter how good you are and what your incentives are. We got to move in 60 days. Can't build a new building, so you're off the list. So that's where we get stung a lot on, is product. We don't have it. We don't have existing buildings. We have very few fully functional infrastructure sites. Financing, same thing. This doesn't mean how big is your incentives. It means how creative can you be to offset the costs of starting up a facility, relocating a facility, et cetera. And then finally, prospecting and marketing. And that is an aggressive program to get out there and identify customers, as opposed to waiting for them to come your way. So when you get all that done, you know, hopefully you've set the stage where you do have all of these components clicking together, that you use the resources from economic development to build these other components and have a very successful total community initiative. Two other slides. This is kind of how we, the Chamber, look at ourselves as it relates to economic development. We think of ourselves as a product manager, and a product manager has two jobs, and that's, first of all, developing the product so it's domestically and internationally competitive, and then secondly, it's selling that product. And this goes into even more issues that we have to deal with if we're going to build a competitive product. And it shows down at the bottom, potentially, the role that the city, that the trust, the Chamber can all play in enhancing this product we call Oklahoma City. And then secondly, we're the ones who are focused on the product sales up there, and those are the key components to being successful in product sales. And then last slide, potential uses and things really just to plant seeds with you all in terms of what potentially the SIP funds could be used for, and that is anything from incentives for job-creating companies to financing projects to land acquisition assembly to infrastructure improvements and enhancements, and even the construction of a facility. Not necessarily advocating any of these, but this is what we see in our competitive space and what other kinds of organizations and entities our competitors create such that they are more competitive. With that, I will stop. You probably have heard a whole lot more about economic development and community development than you ever cared to. That's my story, and I'm sticking with it.
Okay. Well, good update, because things have changed. Just learning economic development 101 again. If you went back to the slide that has the intangibles, what kind of grade, to put you on the spot, would you give Oklahoma City at the moment on those different intangible factors? I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, I think community attitude, is extremely high here. When you talk to people in Oklahoma City, they're proud to be here. They like living here. They tell other people that it's a great place. So I think community attitude is envied by all of our competition. Even the national media talks about this community in a positive way. Research and planning, we spend a whole lot of money on research. And this is primarily economic development research and economic development planning, not so much city, specific planning. And so I think we've done a really good job on that. Sites and buildings is bad. We're just not competitive. When you look at a Dallas or a Houston, even in Austin, a Denver, I mean, where they have major office, industrial parks. I mean, the thing about that is they don't just provide product, they're also out selling that product. So the Chamber isn't the only marketing organization in town. Each one of those development companies are out there beating the drums every day, too, trying to bring in the exact same customers we're trying to bring in. So we're missing that. Financing, there are times when we're competitive, there's times when we're totally not. I mean, we'll lose projects to Texas because of their fund, because they have a bigger checkbook than we do, and they'll just buy the deal. Some of our other competitors can do that, too. We have a great state program, the Quality Jobs, but they have programs like that, and then they have programs on top of those programs. So we can always improve upon that. The other thing is, and this is a real asset of Oklahoma City and Kathy and her staff, and that is the creativity around financing. I mean, it's one thing to have 5 programs and say, pick one. It's the other to say, let us help find a solution to your financing. And the city does a great job in doing those kind of things, but they also have limited resources, and you can only kind of push the envelope so far. In terms of prospecting and marketing, you never have enough money to market, but because of what's going on in this city, because of the national exposure we're getting with Thunder, with Devon, with other things like that, that really helps our ability to open doors. We're going, Allison's leading a delegation to ICSC in 2 weeks. We've been going to ICSC, International Council of Shopping Centers, for 6, 7, 8 years. We have struggled to get appointments with a lot of the key destination retailers we want to. Now they're calling us. So that's really turned around. You know, we're getting companies now calling us because of what's going on in Oklahoma City, which that is a luxury we haven't enjoyed in the past. If you were to see Kathy and my and Allison's calendar when we're in Las Vegas, I mean, it is chock full about every 30 minutes with another appointment for over 2 days. 5 or 6 years ago, never. They wouldn't have listened to us. They wouldn't have taken our call. But now we're a tested and proven big league city. And so they're interested in this market. Whole Foods. I mean, there's a perfect example.
So it sounds like, even though we can't let up on any of the others, having some more focus on sites would probably be the thing that we should think about.
That's a critical component, sites and buildings.
You want to talk about that?
Yeah, and just to kind of wrap some of this up or try to put it into some perspective, you know, one of the things that is changing is that the Economic Development Trust is going to be administering the contract that the city has with the Chamber of Commerce. So I thought it was important for you all to hear from Roy and his staff about what they do and how they do it, because you will be the entity administering that contract in the future. The funds will be provided by the city's general fund, but we're in the process of developing the contract for the coming fiscal year, and you will see that very soon. So for your approval. So I thought it was important that you have some background and framework for what the Chamber does. Councilman Ryan and Councilman McAtee have heard this for years through their involvement with the City Council's Economic Development Committee, but the rest of you may not have been as familiar with it. And the other thing is we did receive official notification that we received the EDA grant for the employment land study. So the trust is going to be providing the matching funds for that study, and then the EDA will match that with $100,000. So we will be able to undertake the consulting work that we think we need to do in order to identify sites and, you know, what's missing, what isn't here, what can we do to try to solve some of the issues of sites and buildings and land. You know, so I think that's a really important part of the puzzle for us as we begin to talk about what are some of the other things that we could use the local and economic development incentive fund for. And just so you all know, the GOLT bond statutes have typically been used by cities and counties in Oklahoma to build industrial parks. So we're not with some success and you know, some have been very successful. So, you know, we're not really talking about anything that's new as far as what the historical use of those funds has been, but for us, it will be a little bit of a departure. So we want to make sure that if we're doing this, that we're going in the right direction, that everybody's comfortable with it, and that we begin to talk about it and look at the issues around it.
And really, to that point of sites and buildings, I don't think the objective is to try to get the city in the business, but it's to try to get the development community either in as partners or to recruit them, the national development, because then you're recruiting another sales team as well as capital and less risk. Two tangential things, too. You mentioned EDA. We're hoping we're going to be able to make an announcement very quickly at I2E, where the city, the chamber, and Presbyterian Health Foundation, a couple other entities are putting up matching funds for $1 million grant for EDA money for commercialization assistance to help companies come out of the research labs and create into new businesses. So that's another role that you all have been involved in. And then one other thing I touched on up there, but I didn't talk about it, was the whole tourism industry. You know, by us being the Convention and Visitor Bureau as well, we get to leverage both economic development funds and tourism funds to do things that a lot of other communities can't do. Specifically what I mean, the SBIR conference he's talking about, the International Asset Management Council, IAMC, who are the corporate real estate executives of the United States, the Seed and Venture Fund, which are the people who control all the seed and venture capital in the United States. We had that conference here. So we can get the Convention and Visitor Bureau to work in tandem with our Economic Development Department to bring people not just to put their heads in beds in the hotel, which is what CVB does, but also to bring the parties that our economic development people want to interface with and want to show Oklahoma City to. So there's some great leverage there in itself, too. So the more we can bring organizations with like missions together to leverage on these and to work hand in glove, the more successful we're going to be.
The other thing I wanted to say about, you asked earlier about education and workforce components, and I just wanted to kind of emphasize what Roy said about building a strong community and, you know, building the kind of community where employers want to be, and just remind you that the work that we do through some of the TIF districts helps us get there even maybe more directly sometimes than some of the Economic Development Fund, incentive fund things will do, like building the world-class environment downtown, or working with some of the local universities that have decided to locate programs in downtown Oklahoma City. There may not be TIF money in that, but me and my staff do a lot of work with helping support those kinds of endeavors in the downtown because we think it's a real important part of downtown redevelopment. So there's that piece. There's the downtown school that's a part of TIF 2 and is contemplated clearly in the original project plan. So, you know, so as we work through some of those projects that are more TIF related, they help us with those workforce issues too. So you guys play kind of a multifaceted role in some of these things.
Kevin, just to follow up on talking about the downtown school, that kind of thing. I think a lot of the focus that we've traditionally had on education at Chamber and elsewhere has been on higher ed because we think of that as the last handoff. But one of the things where Oklahoma, if we talk about Oklahoma City distinguishing itself with maps, that Oklahoma as a state is best in class is with early childhood education. It's not true for Oklahoma City proper, but for Oklahoma as a state, whether it's the New York Times or last week we had a person from the Pew Charitable Trust, Libby Doggett, talk about Oklahoma and say there's not anybody a close second for the quality of education, the access for early childhood education. So however that translates into the marketing piece as well as part of the workforce development. Crazy to start thinking workforce at age 4, but planting the seeds early seems to be pretty strong. So anyway, just mention those as part of the mix as we go forward might be worth consideration.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The final item on our agenda is the General Manager's reports, and it was in your packet. Are there questions or comments on the General Manager's reports? Okay, I'm going to ask a question I haven't prepared for. I know what the answer is, but I want everybody else to know. On the first page, actually it's page 2, the Strategic Investment Program Summary Table, it shows that we have made commitments of about $8.7 million to our gold bond projects. And one of them was with the AAA headquarters. And I was curious as to why we've not made any payments on that particular project yet.
The reason we haven't is that contract was written where they had to be in their new facility for an entire year. And so once that occurs, then we will be working with them to get them their job creation payments.
Because of the $8.7 million that we have committed, we've only spent $236,000. So we've committed a lot more than we spent so far, and hopefully that we'll be able to spend that money and get some benefits from it soon. Any other questions or comments? Are there any other comments from the trustees in general?
One small one, and when we have, Kathy mentioned about the fact that we'll have more concurrence with other trusts in the council and the like. If you could let us know what the sequence is are we signing on first? Have they already blessed it? That kind of thing. It's just informational, really.
Typically, this trust will act on an item before the city council does, or before the water trust, for example.
Okay, so we'll probably be initiating.
Yeah.
Comments from staff? Comments from members of the public? Comments from anybody else who's here? Hearing none, we are adjourned.